Hello and welcome to or welcome back to Lauren's Legends. I hope that you are all doing fantastic and that you are enjoying the holiday season. I am. This is my absolute most favorite time of the year. And this afternoon we were putting up Christmas lights outside and I got very excited. But today's story is nothing cheery. It is actually one of the darkest cases I have ever covered. And while diving into the research of this case, it chilled me to the bone. Today, we will be investigating a 111-year-old cold case, and it's the #1 most famous unsolved axe murder in America. That's right, you guessed it, the Villisca Axe Murder House. Also, please do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe. That way, if you want more videos like this, I'll know. With that, I suggest that you turn a light on and let's jump right in. In the 1900s, a town in Iowa located about 100 miles southwest of Des Moines had several dozen trains pulling into the depot on a daily basis. Traveling by train was very common in this time period. With high foot traffic came bustling businesses that lined the street. From 1912 to 1915, the town built the only publicly funded armory in the state of Iowa. This fact was something that the city was originally very proud of, but would end up being somewhat of a curse. You see, due to the public's knowledge of the armory, they were looked upon to participate in the 1916 Mexican expedition, World War I, and World War II, as well as the Korean and the Vietnam Wars. During World War II, this growing town lost more men per capita than any other county in the entire United States. This pretty town had so much history so early on, and it was named Villisca. It was named this because the townspeople believed it meant pretty place. But what they were unaware of is the word Villisca comes from an Indian word, Waliska, and that means evil spirit. It was as if this little town with big guns was destined for negativity. And unfortunately for the community, all of the accomplishments and losses of life in the wars will be forever insignificant because of the horrific unsolved murders involving 8 of their own. On a quiet residential street sits an old white 3-bedroom farmhouse. Josiah B. Moore, the home owner, was one of Villisca's most prominent businessmen and a well-known church worker. Josiah had been a resident of Villisca for 13 years and was employed by Frank Jones at the Jones store for 9 years. Sarah Moore, wife of Josiah, moved to Iowa in approximately 1894 with her parents, Mr. and Mrs. John Montgomery, and her sister Mary. Sarah was a proud mother of 4 children: Herman, age 11, Catherine, age 10, Boyd, age 7, and Paul, age 5. She was also an active member of the Presbyterian Church who led the Children's Day programs. On June 9, 1912, the Moore family attended the annual Children's Day program around 8 p.m. According to witnesses, Sarah coordinated the program exercises with all the Moore children and their friends while Josiah sat in the congregation. The program ended around 9:30 p.m., and Catherine Moore extended an invitation to her friends Lena and Ina to spend the night at the Moore's home. The sisters were originally supposed to return to their grandmother's house to spend the night. Mr. Moore placed a call to the Stillingers' home to ask permission for the girls to stay over. Blanche, Lena and Ina's older sister, told Mr. Moore that her parents were both outdoors, but she would pass the message along to them. The group of 8 proceeded to walk home from church and arrived sometime between 9:45 and 10 p.m. to their house. The following morning, on June 10, 1912, at approximately 5 a.m., Mary Peckham, the Moore's next-door neighbor, was hanging her laundry on the line in the yard. At approximately 7 a.m., she realized that not only had the Moores not been outside for chores, but the house itself seemed unusually still. This was very odd because the Moores had several animals that every morning they would need attending to. Between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m., Mary Peckham knocked on the door. When she received no response, she attempted to open the door, only to find it locked from the inside. Thank God that door was locked. There is no way that she could have imagined what was on the other side of the door. Mary left the porch and decided to go let out the Moorish chickens and checked on the other livestock. Still confused and at a loss of what to do next and having an overwhelming, ominous feeling, Mary placed a call to Josiah's brother, Ross Moore. When she had just hung up with Jessie, that's Ross's wife, she then saw Ed Shelley, one of Josiah's employees, enter the barn to feed the horses. This did make her eyebrow raise, but she carried on and waited for Ross to arrive. Upon arriving at the home of his brother, Ross attempted to look through the bedroom window, but all the shades had been pulled down and he could not see inside from any window. He then knocked on the door and shouted, attempting to grab the attention of anyone inside of the house. When that failed, he tried his key and opened the door. Although Miss Peckham had followed him onto the porch, she did not enter the parlor. Ross stepped in the home, but went no further than the room off the parlor. When he opened the bedroom door, he saw 2 bodies on the bed and dark stains on the bedding. He returned immediately to the porch and told Miss Peckham to call the sheriff, setting in motion one of the mismanaged murder investigations to ever be undertaken. The 2 bodies that were in the room downstairs were Lena Stillinger, age 12, and her sister Ina, age 8, the friends of the Moore's children. The remaining members of the Moore family were all found in the upstairs room by City Marshal Hank Horton. Every person in the house had been brutally slain, their skulls crushed as they slept. Based on the statements of Mary Peckham and those who saw the Moores at the Children's Day exercise, it is believed that sometime between midnight and 5 a.m., an unknown assailant entered the Moores' home and murdered everyone, one by one. Once the murders were discovered, the news traveled like wildfire through the town. As neighbors and curious travelers met at the house, law enforcement officials quickly lost control of the crime scene. It is said that up to 100 people walked through the house, gawking, and even one man taking photos, which Ross fought the man for and ended up destroying all but one photo. The horde of people are even said to have picked up the murder weapon. The Villisca National Guard was called during the frenzy and finally arrived around noon to cordon off the area and secure the home. Now, at this early stage in the case, the only known facts regarding the scene of the crime were 8 people dead, presumably from the axe left at the crime scene. Doctors estimated the time of death as somewhere shortly after midnight. Curtains were drawn on all the windows in the house except for 2, which did not have curtains. Those windows were covered with clothing belonging to the Moores. All of the victims' faces were covered with bedding after they were killed. A kerosene lamp was found at the foot of the bed of Josiah and Sarah. A similar lamp was found at the foot of the bed of the Stillinger girls. An axe was found in the room occupied by the Stillinger girls, and it was bloody, but an attempt had been made to wipe it off. The axe actually belonged to Josiah Moore. The ceilings in the parents' bedroom and the children's room showed gouge marks, apparently made by the upswing of the axe. And in one of those deep gashes in the ceiling above the parents' bed, it is theorized that the axe had gotten stuck for a moment and that the killer had to yank it out. This was such a crazed attack that the ceiling dust particles had fallen onto the bed. And a piece of a keychain was found on the floor in the downstairs bedroom. A pan of bloody water was discovered on the kitchen table, as well as a plate of uneaten food. the doors were all locked from the inside. Now, this is a good place to pause and talk about the information I am about to go through and give you a quick warning. I am about to go through the information from court records, the coroner, and witnesses, and many details will be very graphic, but I do believe that they are very important to the case as a whole. I am first going to explain the layout of the house a little bit more clearly. When you enter the front door, you are inside the parlor, or what I would consider the living room. To the left was where their guest room was. This is where the two Stillinger girls were found. If you were to go back into the parlor and then go through the kitchen, and on the left towards the back of the house were the stairs that led up to Mr. and Mrs. Moore's bedroom. And when you would reach the top of the stairs, it was like a plateau with their room. And it was an open area. And to the left was the door to the 4 children's bedroom. If you were to go to the right, there was an attic door. And this attic was rather large. It came out later that the police had found smoked cigarette butts on the ground towards the back corner of the attic. This has created the theory that the killer was actually already inside the home, waiting for the family to come home and come in and go to sleep. When the house was quiet, he would then exit the attic, walking into the parents' room, killing them first, and then proceeding through their room to the 4 children, ending their lives, and then finishing with the girls downstairs. That is just absolutely terrifying to me. I can understand the parents being attacked in their sleep and having no time to react at all. But how did all of the 6 children in the home not wake up? This was a brutal attack, and with the axe hitting the ceiling, you would think that that would create a lot of noise. What is also weird to me, and what reminds me of the Amityville house, is that none of the neighbors heard any screaming at all. During the later court cases, there were 14 strong witnesses that testified, and the third witness to testify and appear in the inquest was that of Dr. J. Clark Cooper. He was the first physician to arrive at the scene of the crime, and he had been rushed to the scene after being told, quote, Joe Moore and all of his family were murdered in bed. What makes Dr. Cooper's testimony so important is that while he examined the bodies, he smelled no unusual or chemical odor. This means that he did not believe that any of the victims had been incapacitated by chloroform or any other chemical. And again, all of the bodies had been covered with sheets, and the same with every mirror in the house. But Dr. Cooper was able to surmise that this had all been done after their deaths. This is his direct quote. I saw no clothes sticking to any of the wounds, and in my superficial examinations, neither did I see that any clothing had any holes in it. I mean, any of the sheets or pillows, nothing had holes in it. Reviewing the coroner's reports, let's start with Mr. and Mrs. Moore's injuries. These are believed to be the first victims, and these were just absolutely brutal. Sarah Moore was the only victim that was actually hit in the face with the sharp end of the axe. Both parents had been struck in the head 20 to 30 times. And evidence shows that the killer had originally attacked them and then come back a second time. Josiah's head had been completely crushed from the bottom jaw up. No eyes left. The reason it is believed that the killer had come back a second time is that one of Sarah's shoes had been found on Josiah's side of the bed. The investigators had found the shoe on its side, but strangely, it had blood inside it, and it was also under it. It was the coroner, Dr. Lindquist's assumption that the shoe had been placed normally when Josiah was first hit, and that the blood had run into the shoe. He believed when the killer later returned to the bed, it knocked the shoe over. In the next room, all 4 of the Moore's children appeared to have slept through the entire attack, and each of them were bludgeoned to death by the blunt end of the axe. Many have theorized that the perpetrator had walked around and quickly struck each one to incapacitate them, and then went back to each to make sure the job had been completed. As if things were not weird and gruesome enough, downstairs, the Stillinger girls are when things get very strange. During the interview of Dr. F.S. Williams, he quoted, "Lena had been struck in the head and squirmed down in the bed, perhaps 1/3 of the way. Evidence also showed that the poor girl's nightgown had been pushed up and that she was not wearing any undergarments underneath. Her undergarments would be found thrown under the bed. It was also seen that she had a blood stain in the inside of her knee. Could that have actually come from her getting yanked down on the bed after she had already been hit and possibly incapacitated?" Lena was also the only victim out of all 8 that had a defensive wound on her arm. Her body was also positioned in a way that could have suggested that she fought back. Now, her sister Ina was facing Lena in the bed, and her injuries were very similar to the children upstairs. This begs the question on if this monster had somehow violated Lena. The doctors did do an examination and could not find any evidence of that. But beside of the bed and laying near the axe was a 2-pound slab of uncooked bacon. And it was wrapped in a dish towel and had yarn on the outside of it tying it together. Like, ooh, this predator may not have needed to touch Lena to get his gratification, but he could have substituted the bacon for a human and enjoyed himself while looking at his handiwork. This case has baffled many experts now for over 100 years. There are 3 conflicting theories and so many different suspects. The first theory is that the attacker had extreme hatred for Mr. and Mrs. Moore, and that is why the attack on them was so overly brutal. That makes sense, but then there is the theory that it was all sexually motivated and that Lena was the prize. Could be the case, but she also could have been an extra thing that he got and got him excited. The third is that the house can seem to pull the darkness out of people to get them to do crazy things. And I am going to first go through the suspects, and then we will come back to that, to some crazy things that have happened in this house after this whole situation. When this case happened in America in 1912, what people don't talk about much is that there were several other axe murders that were happening in states all across America, and they were all happening along the trail of the Southern Pacific Railroad. Several of these murders were done the same way, with whole families being taken out with the back end of the axe. To add to the similarities, some of these houses even had the windows and the mirrors covered as well. And there were also kerosene lamps that were placed at the end of beds. Way too similar, in my opinion, to not be connected. It would have been very easy for some crazed individual to just hop on and off this train, create havoc, and then move on to another city just hours later. The first suspect that I'm going to dive into was that of Frank F. Jones, who was actually the senator of Iowa at the time. Josiah had actually worked for him for, again, 9 years until he decided to open up his own operation that ultimately took business away from Jones. Their relationship soured greatly, and the men completely stopped speaking to each other. It was said that if one saw the other on the other side of the street, they would turn around and go the opposite way. Clearly bad blood was between them. And then a rumor was started that outraged Jones, and that was that Josiah had begun an affair with Frank Jones' own daughter-in-law. The telephone operators would later testify in court that the daughter-in-law, Miss Donna Jones, was actually having an affair with Josiah Moore and other men. She was having some fun on the town that she was not supposed to be having. The telephone operators were actually all questioned under oath, and they told many tales of how Donna enjoyed meeting with local men, but it was very obvious to the operators that Joe Moore was by far her favorite, sparking many rumors that Frank Jones hired a hitman to take him out after the absolute embarrassment of the torrid affair and what it would cause his family. 2 years after the deaths of the Moore's family, the suspected hitman was named William Blackie Mansfield, was actually investigated for the murders of his own wife, father, and mother-in-law, and his own infant child that had all met their ends by an axe. This prompted a huge investigation into him about the Moore's case, and there were many similarities, but Mansfield was acquitted after it was found by payroll records that he had been out of Villisca during the time of the attack. The next strong suspect is a man named Henry Moore. This Henry was not related to the family, just so happened to have the same name. But he was convicted for the murder of his own mother and his own grandmother in Missouri. Where were you guys finding these guys, and why did everybody have an axe? The woman had been slain, of course, with an axe, because that's all apparently people were using back then. But there were several federal investigators that had been tracking him. They thought he was responsible for the Villisca killings and 22 other axe murders that had happened throughout the country and along the railways. He did get convicted of his family's murders and spent 36 years in prison, but was never charged for the Moore family's murders. The last but not least suspect is that of the traveling preacher, Reverend George Kelly. This is the number one suspect for many people for many reasons. Many churchgoers that had been around Kelly had stated that he had mental problems, and they believed that he was a sexual deviant. There is proof that he had previously been arrested for writing disgusting letters to women that had replied to a job offer that he had posted. The night of the church event that Sarah had helped put on for the children, Reverend Kelly had been in attendance and had left not long before the family walked home. He was also small in stature, and many people believed that that would mean he wouldn't have enough of the strength to do what he did. But in reality, a very interesting fact has come out. The ceilings in the upstairs home were not very tall, and a tall man would not have been able to swing the axe as strongly as it was, leaving evidence to show that would mean a shorter man would have to be able to have the movement with his arm to bring that force down. One of the most damning pieces of evidence is that he left Villisca on a train the morning after the murders and allegedly was talking to the other passengers and told them about 8 dead souls in Villisca who were butchered in their beds. The strange thing about this is that the bodies had not yet been discovered at that point. When the police were questioning him, Kelly did sign a confession months later saying God had whispered to him to suffer the children and come unto me. But he also told many people that the police had beaten the confession out of him, and he recanted his confession at his September trial. The jury came out deadlocked 11-1 for acquittal. The police were determined to get their man and took him to court again, and a second jury also acquitted Kelly in November. Since this case, no one else has ever been tried for the murders. Okay, I know, but the story is not over yet. Do you remember back to when I alluded that many believe this house is haunted, evil, and has now become a possible portal for spirits? Well, the scary stories began almost immediately after the deaths of the family, and the house has changed ownership many times. In the 2000s, it was opened up as a place that people could rent out and stay in, and they began doing tours. This opened up many paranormal investigators to be able to do their own research there, and a lot has been captured. They have provided audio, video, and photographic proof of paranormal activity. Tours have been cut short by children's voices, falling lamps, moving ladders, and flying objects. Psychics have confirmed the presence of spirits dwelling in the home, and many have actually communicated with them, and skeptics have left believers. Oddly enough, the most amount of paranormal activity happens in the downstairs bedroom where the Stillinger girls met their end, especially the closet in this room. The closet is believed to be a portal that was open that night when pure evil went through that house. It is believed that this has been caused because the killer spent most of the time in that room, possibly staring at Lena. One thing that really creeps me out is that the Villisca Axe Murder House and the Sally House, another very well-known haunted house, have the same exact address. Yeah, both addresses are almost identical with only one difference. The Villisca address is 508 East 2nd Street and the Sally House is 508 North 2nd Street. That's weird. I wonder if there is a way to find out if they lay on ley lines or something. But another creepy situation that happened in the Villisca home happened several years ago. The caretaker of the property, who was a very big skeptic, and I would think that you would probably have to be a huge skeptic to be able to work in that house after knowing what had happened there. I digress. He was working that day and he was also kind of like a security guard, and he was upstairs in the room where the 4 children stayed. He was tidying it up and he heard a door open and close downstairs. He assumed that it was one of the normal curious trespassers that commonly would try to get a look in the property without paying for a ticket. He heard the person start walking up the stairs and could hear the stairs creaking. He decided to duck back into the closet and pull out his taser for a surprise attack. When he heard the footsteps enter the room and was almost to the door in front of him, he sprung out quickly with his taser first, and there was absolutely nothing in front of him but a huge gust of wind, and he said that he felt it take the breath out of him. He quickly left the house and didn't go back in that day. He did return later, but not that day. The last story today is one that leaves me completely baffled, and it's very scary. A paranormal investigator had gone in the house with his team in 2014. They were doing an overnight investigation and decided to do an exercise where only one person would go in at a time and try to contact the spirits in there. When it was the investigator's turn, he went in and decided to go in the downstairs guest room and sit in the middle of it like it is believed the killer did. When his time was up, he didn't come out of the house. His other teammates were confused and decided to go inside and check out the situation. When they turned the corner from the parlor and looked into the guest room, just like Josiah's brother had done so many years before, they saw the paranormal investigator laying on the floor with a knife sticking out of his chest and a growing pool of blood. He was airlifted to the hospital and sent into surgery, and the wound was very severe, but he did survive it. And the doctors were able to tell that it had been self-inflicted. And when he woke up and was interviewed, he stated that he had entered some sort of trance and remembered sitting in the room and then nothing until he woke up at the hospital. And his teammates had been interviewed and no one said that he was depressed or had issues like that. And he had been on hundreds of other investigations and had never had a problem like that. So, wow. What do you think about this case? Do you think a place that has had such a horrible act done in it can hold the energy and maybe affect others that enter it? Who do you think committed the murders over 100 years ago? Do you think it was one of the suspects mentioned, or do you think it's a phantom that no one ever suspected and that was riding trains and just loved taking out entire families? And what the heck is going on with everyone using axes? There has to be a better way. Like, that is such a hard weapon. My brain goes weird places. You guys know this. Every video, it's got to go somewhere, but I just can't help but think that there was something better than that. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, as always. And if you are still watching, please drop me a house emoji in the comments. Let's play a little game. I would like to know who my real MVPs are that are still watching to the end of the video. As always, again, thank you. I appreciate you more than you know, and I will see you in the next one.